Prime Minister Mark Carney's ethics disclosure filings have been released. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre had lots to say about it. Also, will Canada strike a deal with the U.S. without raising tariffs? Here with more is our federal political correspondent and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins me now. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Brian, this was a big story on our newscast Monday. Prime Minister Mark Carney's ethics disclosures, filings, they've been released. So, what do they tell us about his financial holdings?
Well, they tell us that he wasn't telling the truth on a couple of points during the election campaign. He said that he only owned cash and some private property, like his home and his cottage. Now we know that's not the case. He owns shares in hundreds of companies, lots of funds like Brookfield Asset Management. And also during the campaign, or actually just before the campaign, if you recall, there were a couple of journalists saying, well, why don't you release this information that you filed with the ethics commissioner now instead of waiting 120 days so that people can see if there's any possible conflicts of interest? And Carney bristled at that question and said, you know, basically, how dare you? He said there's no possibility of a conflict of interest. And then the disclosure comes out, and we find out that, well, there's 103 companies or entities, such as mutual funds, that if it comes up, anything to do with them that could benefit him or these entities during the course of government work, he has to recuse himself. He has to walk out of the room. He can't be part of the decision making process. And you might say, well, it's no big deal. How often is that going to come up? Well, one of the firms is Westinghouse. Well, they are big into building nuclear reactors. They would be one of the companies bidding for new nuclear reactors. Carney wants to turn Canada into a clean energy superpower, and one of the ways of doing that is nuclear reactors. So if there's a federal government component that he would have a decision-making say in it, he'd have to leave. Same with issues surrounding the payment firm, Stripe. You could make the argument that Carney may have already violated that because he made a decision about the digital services tax, um, and before this ethics disclosure came out, that could be seen as beneficial to a firm like Stripe, or so many other instances. And then, of course, there's the hundreds of other companies that he's just invested in, most of which aren't Canadian.
Right. And obviously, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre had lots to say about Carney's ethics filings, and he also made comments about the need to curb immigration. So, what is Poilievre calling for, Brian?
He wants basically a hard cap on immigration, and in fact said that more people need to be leaving than coming in over the next couple of years until we can catch up. And based on simple math, he's not wrong. He's pointed out before that we're bringing in people faster than we're increasing the housing supply. You go to any major city and housing prices are up dramatically. I mean, I know the focus is always on Toronto and Vancouver, which doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but prices are also up in Calgary and Edmonton, even in medium-sized cities like Saskatoon or Regina, next door in Saskatchewan. Prices are up. People are starting to feel it and say, wait a minute, things are costing more. We've got a strain on the healthcare system. And of course, he pointed out that youth unemployment is at a generational high, hasn't been this high since 2009. It's in the mid teens, mid to high teens, actually, in Ontario and Alberta. But nationally, it's mid teens, but it's about 17% in Ontario and Alberta because young people can't find jobs. What are companies doing? They're using temporary foreign workers who they can pay, the lowest wages to. So, there's many reasons that Polyev is right on this. And the Carney government has just said, well, we'll bring immigration down to pre-pandemic levels. Well, that was still very high. That was still a drastic increase from where it had traditionally been over the past 15 years or so prior to that. So it's perhaps more has to be done than what the Carney government is doing now, and that's what Polyev is calling for.
The Prime Minister is promising to get spending under control, to cut regulations, to trim the size of the federal civil service. And does that leave Poilievre much room to grow, or does it threaten the Conservatives if Carney picks up some support from voters who like those moves that he's doing?
If Carney delivers on what he's saying, and the three big things last week were cut the budget. He talked about cutting programming spending, or his minister's office did, by 7.5% next fiscal year, 10% the year after that, and 15% the year after that. Those are significant cuts. But again, this is a government budget that has grown tremendously, far above inflation, far above population growth during the Trudeau years. So this has to be done. If he's able to accomplish that, if he's able to cut regulation and red tape to allow business more the ability to grow and flourish, and if he trims the size of the federal civil service, then yeah, I think a lot of voters that would normally lean conservative would be looking and saying, hey, this guy's not bad. In fact, he might be one of us. But everyone I talk to is in a wait and see mode. If he delivers on an oil pipeline, which Premier Danielle Smith said she wants to see action on by uh, next or this fall. She wants to see something happening by this fall. If he hits these markers, and he's not just saying the right things, then yes, that's a threat to the Conservative Party going forward. Now, if he keeps saying them but doesn't deliver, well, then I think of a lot of voters who went for him instead of Polyev in the last election might be looking around to switch their vote.
U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened more tariffs on Canada at a rate of 35% by August 1st. So, Brian, is there any chance the Carney government could get a deal?
Possibly, but here's where I'm going to cut them some slack. It's Donald Trump. We don't know. He changes his mind a lot. He often doesn't know, he gets his own tariffs and the reasons for them confused because he has so many. And he was in the White House this week and he's asked about the letters that went out. Canada got one last week. Lots of other world leaders got them. And is there a chance to strike a deal? And he said, no, the letters are the deal. Now, in the letters, he talked about doing a deal, but when asked about it, he said, no, the letters are the deal. That's it. That's all. And then in the same answer said, but we could talk. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
he,
Yeah.
he contradicts himself many times. I think he's open to a deal. Maybe this is just part of negotiating
Yeah.
strategy. Maybe he talks off the cuff too much.
He
I'm
does.
not sure.
Yes.
But, there are ways to get a deal. I just don't know that the Carney government is handling this in the right way. They don't have a salesperson in there. They've got an accountant. They've given Ambassador Kristen Hillman the lead on this instead of someone like his point man on this politically, Dominic LeBlanc. LeBlanc is the type of guy that you send in to seal the deal. Ambassador Hillman is someone you send in to, take an accounting of things when they're done, to take the inventory. Very accomplished woman, very smart, well regarded, but this needs a politician's touch, a salesperson's touch. That's why I think they're handling badly.
The Prime Minister made some comments about intensifying trade talks, but he also hinted that we may not get a deal without tariffs, and that seems very likely. Although we are talking about Donald Trump again, so you never know.
Um, so this is something that I've been writing about and talking about since February when I went down to Washington with Premier Ford and several of the other premiers. Um, because what we were hearing on the ground was uh, support on both sides of the aisle for a global 10% tariff. Now, it wasn't universal support, but it was starting to grow. That maybe every country pays a minimum 10% tariff, and then you have deals on other issues on the side. Uh, in the deal that the United Kingdom struck, there is a 10% wide-ranging tariff. And so we may face a deal where, yes, some of our goods get in tariff-free, but there are still tariffs on other parts of the supply chain or our exports. So Prime Minister Carney acknowledged this. One, he said trade talks will intensify, but two, we need to understand that the whole global order has changed and we may not get a deal without it. I don't think that's going to sit well with a lot of Canadians who appear to be in a fighting mood. I'm not sure fighting's the right way to do it, but they appear to be in a fighting mood.
A new poll from Angus Reid shows most Canadians want tough talks with the United States, a real hardline position, obviously. So will we get a deal there?
Well, if you take the hardline position, then no, because that means you're demanding things but not willing to give anything. And this poll shows that no, we shouldn't give in on this. No, we shouldn't give on that. No, we shouldn't give on anything. But we want. And that's been the complaint that the Americans have about us and other countries have had about us during trade talks, that we want to protect all of our things. And Canada can be a very protectionist country, but then we say, now let us sell to you. Well, wait a minute. It's got to be give and take. And that's how any negotiation has to be. That doesn't mean capitulating to the Americans, it means negotiating in good faith. So, yeah, we're going to have to give something on dairy quota that will upset Quebec's dairy farmers. We're going to have to give some things on other issues that are trade irritants between the two countries. But that's because we want something in return from them. The Angus Reid poll even said, should we buy more military equipment or promise to um, from the Americans to try and secure a trade deal? Absolutely not, said the majority. Well, okay, well, what are you willing to do to get a deal? If you just don't want a deal, if you just want to be angry, then so be it. But your neighbors, your kids, yourself, you could be unemployed as a result of this. Jobs are on the line. We have to take these things seriously and we have to do them properly, not just being angry Canadians who want to be furious and condescending to the Americans.
Mhm. Now, after Donald Trump's latest threat, warning, whatever you want to call it, Carney was invited to meet with Canada's premiers in Ontario's cottage country. So is this an emergency meeting?
No, there was an erroneous headline that went out by one of my competitors who portrayed it as Mark Carney had called the meeting, and that it was going to be at a fancy resort in Muskoka. Well, this was a meeting of the Council of the Federation, the Premiers Group, that was scheduled months and months and months ago. Ontario's the chair of the council for this year, and they announced months ago that, yeah, we're going to take all of the premiers and we're going to go meet in cottage country. It's at a resort called Deerhurst. This is where Shania Twain, their claim to fame is Shania Twain got her start there. But let me tell you, I've stayed at Deerhurst. It hosted the G7, or I guess it was the G8 back then, years ago, and they still have the little plaques where each of the leaders stayed. This is a resort that has seen better days. You are not in the lap of luxury at Deerhurst. And Carney is just tagging along for the meeting. I think you'll fly in for one day. They're meeting on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. So I'll be up there for part of that and seeing how things go. But yeah, this is not an emergency meeting. Carney's edition, I guess, could be seen as an emergency meeting, and it's not at a swanky five-star resort. It's a very nice place, but it's a place that an awful lot of people can afford to go to, and a lot do.
Not what you'd exactly expect when you hear swanky. Yeah. All right, Brian, until we meet again next week, have a great one. Brian Lilley, federal political commentator with the Toronto Sun. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.